Hello again, I'm Matthew Gore from lightandmatter.org. Some of you may have seen the camera sliders that I've built in the past, but this is not one of my own designs. This one is a Zeapon Micro 2 slider. So before I continue, let me say that Zeapon did send me this thing for free to review, but the video is not sponsored. It is as honest and unbiased as I can make a review of a product I didn't pay for. I have no restrictions or input or oversight from the company. Anyway, the name Micro is not a mistake. This thing is only 16 inches long overall, with rails that are under a foot long. So it's easy to fit into a backpack if you're hiking, or your luggage if you're hopping on a plane with just a little carry-on suitcase. Now you may be saying, if the rails are only a foot long, then taking into account the size of the gantry plate and the ball head, the travel on this thing can't be more than about 8 inches. What good is that? Well, as it turns out, with a clever bit of engineering, the travel on this slider is actually longer than the rails themselves. As the ball head slides to the left on the top of the slider, the mounting plate is sliding to the right on the bottom, and vice versa, so the actual travel is about 15 inches total. And as small as it is, it has a powerful motor that is supposed to work with cameras up to nearly 10 pounds in weight. I tested it with a 5-pound camera and had no problems. Not bad. I've been testing this unit off and on for the past several months now, but I've learned quite a bit. Primarily, I've learned that about 15 inches of travel is enough to create some really nice effects. So let me start up by showing you. A couple of weeks ago, I drove out to the coast again, to Cape Disappointment. I wanted to test the variety of different movements that were possible with a slider like this. I started over at the Cape Disappointment lighthouse with some horizontal movement and then with some forward motion, zooming up into this gap in the driftwood that made a nice little window to peek through at the lighthouse and waves. Then, back at the North Head Lighthouse, I used the slider like a little elevator to lift the camera vertically to reveal more of the lighthouse above the surrounding scrub brush. From down on the hillside above the coastal cliffs, I experimented with more horizontal movements and some more vertical ones. With any slider, it's important to have something in the frame that's close to the camera so that we see the contrast between its movement and the more stationary background. But it's especially important with a shorter slider like this. Of course, it's also really handy for shooting product video and macro, where smooth pans are especially critical. It's also useful for shooting time-lapses, but I'll come back to that in a bit. The box includes a padded neoprene sleeve for the slider, and a small ball head that would be handy for a GoPro or a phone, but I needed to replace it with a larger one for my Sony a7R III. Actually, I first tried this Bogan trigger release head, but it's way too tall and literally made of cast iron, and it feels like it weighs almost as much as the slider. So I started using this old Vanguard ball head, which works okay, but it's still bigger and heavier than I'd like for a compact slider. So I tried this Per-Gear ball head that I found in a box in my closet, which is utterly useless. It's no more sturdy than the tiny Zeapon ball head. So I ended up buying this little guy for about 40 bucks, and it's amazing how much weight I can put on this thing and it never sags or slips. And it's nice and small. The box does not include a battery for the slider, but it uses the common Sony NP-F550 style batteries, which power it for 6 hours or so. And these bigger ones that I'm using pretty much last all day. I've never actually managed to run one dead. This little platform for the slider is called the Easy Lock 2. It's sold separately and is handy for tabletop use. So let me show you how this thing works. The slider does have manual control buttons available on the motor box itself, but most people will want to control it with the phone app, which looks like this. You start up the app and it detects the slider, and you press the link icon to connect them, and that brings up the main page of the app. And here, it's divided into two sections. The video mode is up by default, but there's also a time-lapse section. In the video mode, you can manually move the slider head by pulling this little controller handle to the left or right. That's nice and easy. But if you want, you can also use this little timeline down at the bottom to automate exactly how far you want it to travel and at what speed. This is really easy. You move the slider to the position you want to start with, and then press the marker at the number 1 position. Then you move the slider to the next position and press the number 2 marker. And then you can keep going with up to 5 waypoints total. You can then change the speed of travel between the 2 points by moving that waypoint up or down. And the app tells you over here to the left how long it takes for the slider to follow that path from start to finish. Then you press the number 1 marker to return the camera to that spot, and press play, and it starts moving along that path to point number 2. And as I said, you can add more points the same way, and then you can adjust the speed of travel for each of those points. So that's the basics for shooting video, and as you can see, the operation of this slider is nice and simple, but flexible and powerful at the same time. Now, let's take a look at the Time-Lapse tab. The first thing that you'll notice here on the Time-Lapse tab is that the app has an intervalometer built in. To use it, you'll need to connect the camera to the slider. So, you'll just plug in a cable to the shutter release jack on the slider, and of course, plug the other end into the remote release port on your camera. Then, back in the app, you'll set the shutter speed that you'll be using. Here I'll just set it to 1/100th of a second. And you can also add in a delay for in-camera noise reduction if you want. And then you select the desired amount of time between shots. I'll say 2 seconds. Now you need to set up the travel path for the slider back in the video tab. But once that's set up, the app calculates how many shots total your sequence will be at that rate. In this case, it's 223 shots, and it gives you an estimate of how long the finished time-lapse will be. Here it's 9.3 seconds at 24 frames per second playback. Now, if you press this big play button, it doesn't start the time-lapse. It just gives you a preview of the slider's motion. To start shooting the time-lapse, you press the camera button over here, which unfortunately is hard to see because of how squashed the app layout is on my phone. And as you can see, this starts the slider moving, and the camera starts shooting. What's going on here is that the slider triggers a photo, and then waits for the delay that you've set, and then quickly moves the camera forward to the next position, and stops and holds the camera still while it triggers another photo, and so on. So the camera is not moving while the photos are taken. Just a few days ago, I went up to Skagit County to take a look at the daffodil fields that were in bloom. And then I decided to shoot a time-lapse sequence, raising the camera above the field a bit over the course of about half an hour. This is how it turned out. Incidentally, about 20 minutes into shooting this, another car pulled up, and a few women got out to look at the flowers, I guess, and one of them started walking out into the field, into my shot. Without even thinking about it, I shouted out to her to stay out of my shot, but I'd been sitting around for about 20 minutes by myself, and my voice came out a lot louder than I expected, and I scared the bejesus out of her. Really bad form on my part, and I didn't get a chance to apologize as they drove off pretty quickly. There's probably an Instagram photo of me out there somewhere with a hashtag on it. I still feel bad. My camera got the shot though. As you've seen, the slider can produce some pretty dramatic results, despite its compact size, and it's really nice and easy to use. That said, it hasn't been perfect for me either. I have a few minor complaints and also some suggestions for improvement that can be made in the app, I hope. Let me start with the fact that the slider stops for each shot while you're shooting a time-lapse. At first, this seems like a great idea, but there are a couple of problems with it. First, I find that if I'm shooting at 1-second intervals, the starting and stopping actually creates more camera shake than if it just continued at a slow pace. But the really important issue has to do with shutter angle. I can't explain all of the details in a video like this. I trust that you can all Google shutter angle. There are lots of good explanations out there, but the basic idea is this. When shooting video or motion film, there's actually a desirable degree of motion blur based on the frame rate that you're shooting at to get a traditional cinematic look. If you use too fast a shutter speed and don't get enough motion blur, the results can look choppy or stuttered. But this is true of blur caused by motion in the subject and also motion caused by camera movement. And if the camera stops when you shoot each photo of a time-lapse, then there's no motion blur from camera movement. So I'd really like to see Zeapon put an option on this app so that we can choose whether the camera stops between shots or continues on a slow, smooth path. The second issue that I ran into was this. As I was driving out to the coast a few weeks ago, I stopped at a random spot in the middle of nowhere to shoot a time-lapse. It was here, actually. When I got my camera set up, though, I discovered that there was a dramatic amount of sag and sloppiness in the setup. Eventually, I tracked it down to the fact that the camera carriage on the slider was rocking back and forth on the rail because these screws on the side were all loose. So loose that I could unscrew them with my fingers. So I said, aha, I'll just use the hex key from the bottom of the easy lock and tighten them down, but it's the wrong size. I was already over 2 hours from home, so I turned around and drove back to the town of South Bend and found a hardware store where I bought this little set of metric hex keys for about $5 and proceeded to tighten the thing up. I now keep the correctly sized one taped to the bottom of the slider just in case I need it. So, to my friends at Zeapon, these screws either need some Loctite on the threads from the factory, or some locking washers, or at the very least, the screw heads should be the same size all around the slider. Anyway, when the screws are tightened down, I find that I don't have much sag with the slider, but I do still have some. I showed you this clip earlier, but it was corrected. This is the uncorrected clip, and the sag is accentuated because of the wide-angle lens and the full range of travel, but I don't think this is user error. Of course, it is easy enough to fix in post. I also get some noise from the motor when it's moving from about medium to top speed. Here, the sound is recorded from the camera on the slider using the push-button controls on the slider at its 3 standard speeds. So it's not dead silent, but it's not very loud either. If you're recording audio from off camera, it shouldn't be an issue. And finally, I'll just mention that although the Zeapon app clearly has provisions for controlling a motorized pan head with tilt and follow focus, they don't actually sell a motorized head for this thing yet, so if you need those things, you won't be able to use them all with this slider as an integrated system. Okay, so all of that said, let's talk about the price. The Micro 2 slider costs about $410, and if you want the Easy Lock also, the package will cost about $500. That might sound like a lot until you stop and realize that other sliders with similar features, like the Edelkrone Slider 1 Pro version 2, costs $900. So it's more than double the price, and it only has 8 inches of travel distance. about half of the Zeapons. The Zeapon design is actually more similar to the Edelkrone Slider Plus Compact, with the addition of the motorized slide module. Together, they also cost about $1,000, and they provide roughly the same travel distance as the Zeapon Micro 2, but you can only use the Slider Plus tilted up to about 23 degrees. And at that, you can only use a 5-pound camera, while the Zeapon can go a full 90 degrees vertical. So the Zeapon has some significant advantages and costs half as much. I think that's something that any photographer would appreciate. So overall, I have been really impressed with this thing. It's a useful size for me, it has a robust build, and it's strong enough to lift my camera. It's stable, and it's easy to use. It's not absolutely perfect in every way, but I can't say that most of my other equipment is either. And at the Zeapon's price, I don't mind working around the little issues that I've mentioned. To me, the Zeapon slider seems like a really strong option. But that's me. I'm a photographer, not primarily a video shooter, and your needs may be different from mine. Let me know in the comments below whether you think any of these issues that I've run across would be a deal breaker for you. And if you found this video useful or interesting, give it a like. It's a huge help to small channels like mine. And that's it. Stay safe out there, everyone.